Hey, my name is Austin. I'm a Caucasian American living in Trinity, Texas, and attending school at Sam Houston State University. I've grown up the majority of my life in an upper middle class home with other siblings. For the most part, I never had been faced with what it means to have prejudice and discrimination brought upon me. I always felt like I stayed out of trouble and treated people right. When we first were given this assignment of defining America, I wasn't sure what approach I wanted to take. I thought maybe a super formal way would get me the best grade for my class on this project, but honestly, I'm going to keep it real and tell you what I think from what I have seen. When I rolled the question of how do you define America in my head, the first thought that really comes to me is hate. America is full of hate. There's so much hate in this country, and after reading the sources and learning from the lessons of this summer two semester, this idea of America just being full of hate is amplified in my head. I cannot count the number of times my jaw has dropped after reading some of the actions and laws that the people tolerated in the past. I feel that America has an amazing system put in the hands of a flawed people. Our forefathers who wrote the Constitution did not have women, immigrants, or slaves in their thoughts when writing it. The system that America stands on today was built on racism, and if not by racist people, was definitely built to appeal to some of the racist and prejudiced people living within its borders at the time. For some reason, America can be seen constantly pushing back on progressive ideas. It took a nation of people, in some cases, being beat, killed, and unlawfully thrown in jail to obtain their freedom. This is just sad. I feel I can't just leave my definition of America left to the one word of hate. We can see progressive ideas led by great leaders in this country throughout time. More progressive ideologies full of love, justice, and equality for all. These movements have been raising questions and stating facts that not a lot of people or news sources like to bring up. There's still a lot of work to be done in this country, though. In my opinion, a big problem with hate in America is that African Americans still are facing the effects of long term racism. I blame this on how fresh the liberation of African Americans is. It hasn't even been 100 years since African Americans had tasted the freedom that whites in America have tasted since first landing their ships on Plymouth Rock. One source that really spoke to me about the hate and unevenness of power in the African American people is How Free is Free by Leon Litwack. This source from the book Been in the Storm So Long showed the account of the freed African Americans right after the Civil War, and from this source we can really see the oppression and hate these people had to face. The source said on page 223, to what then could free blacks aspire in a society dominated by white men and women intent on using any means to perpetuate that domination? This quote, in my opinion, defines America and the trends we see throughout history. White men and women continuing to try and perpetuate the dominance on minorities. America didn't just have its focus on just the minority groups of African Americans throughout history, though. Women also faced oppression as well. This oppression, to me, is seen from the form of hate directed at the women of America. This hate could see itself manifested in many subtle ways as well nowadays in the U.S. It can be seen from women being seen as sex objects from American music, comedy, porn, and movies. Women always face Women also face today's problems in the workforce from unequal pay and less hours. Just as the African Americans fought for their freedom, so did the women. People saw how valuable these women could be from the modern history source book Jane Addams' Why a Woman Should Vote in 1915. We saw a woman who didn't just see herself as a mindless slave of taking care of children and her husband, but saw herself as a person who can add input and make the country of the United States a safer place for its citizens, and herself. Women still face the problem of being objects, and to me, that is a big problem in the U.S. I'm not some kind of white knight feminist, but I also do see how society cuts off women of today, and I feel that women do not have the recognition they deserve. Another huge issue we see in America today is that is being fueled by hate is immigration within the United States. In my opinion, the US has always tried to find a scapegoat or a group not as strong or wealthy to hate on for the problems they may just occur in every country that may just occur in every country, such as a lack of jobs and people mooching off Social Security. This hate bounced around from different immigrants, ranging from the Irish coming in from the US to look for work during the Civil War era to Hispanics trying to escape poverty and violence occurring in Mexico today. The craziest thing to me is we tend to always hear the same excuse of why these immigrants should be here. They are taking all our jobs. They are dangerous. They are dirty. Why does every immigrant who fits into the minority, non-white, non-Protestant cookie cutter look have these same attributes? Is it really just because they are dangerous, or is it because America since day one had an issue with people who are different from them and look for any half-assed excuse to try and get rid of the minority immigrants? From the source in class called The Oldest and the Newest Empire, China and the United States by William Spear, we were able to not only see the mistreatment and pure hate Americans had for the Chinese, but the comparison of how immigrants would be treated from each country. The Chinese greeted immigrants with kindness and understanding. They understood that a foreign person may be unable to understand what is going on in this country, and kindness and patience would be the correct way of dealing with them. When we see how Americans treated the Chinese immigrants, we also saw that there was this power move the U.S. was trying to place on the Chinese people, immigrants. They knew that they could take advantage of these people, so they did. It wasn't just the attitudes of the U.S. citizens that showed this power move over immigrants and hatred towards them, but the U.S. also enacted laws to prove this point. The 1924 Immigration Act gave a clear-cut view of the attitude the U.S. had against these immigrants coming in. They made regulation restrictions very difficult and also had some harsh punishments if not followed correctly. We can see a pattern of hate in America, and from the evidence I've learned in this class, I blame this on the U.S. and how it treated its citizens and immigrants. It set the example of how things continue to work in this country. Thankfully, it seems that Newton's third law of motion, for every action there's equal and opposite reaction, doesn't just apply to an apple dropping on the ground, but the fight against hate in the U.S. Martin Luther King Jr., in my eyes, was the person who inspires a lot of Americans nowadays to stand up for equality between one another. He said no to prejudiced views and showed America that its definition of hate can change. King was a fighter, and when he won the Battle of Civil Rights, he moved on for better treatment of all people, as seen in his speech, Letter from a Birmingham Jail. This is something I feel everyone should look back to when thinking of how America is today and how we wish for change within its borders. We don't give up once the race is won. You start working for the next one. That's the biggest issue I feel with people wanting change. We aren't putting enough effort in. We have to keep pushing and looking for the next steps and stopping inequality, just like Martin Luther King Jr. did. I do define America as a country stained from hate, but that does not mean this definition is the ultimatum of this country. If we want to see change in this nation, we as a people have to keep fighting for the underdog, keep loving our enemy, and come together in times of trouble. This may sound cliche, but love is what America needs the most.